Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I pay tithes on my whole income. But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, the later went home justified, not the former. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The Gospel of the Lord. If today you came to Mass feeling like this tax collector, perhaps carrying shame or feeling not worthy, or feeling like God would never forgive you, well, this is the gospel for you today. But there's something here for all of us. Saint Teresa tells us that prayer is nothing else, in my opinion, but being on terms of friendship with God. And with God frequently conversing in secret to Him. And we know He loves us. And yet, good, solid friendships will often encounter the need for humble reconciliation, and mostly the need for sincerity. And so the book of Sirach reminds us, the prayer of the lowly pierces the clouds. What a beautiful image. And the psalm reminds us that the Lord hears the cry of the poor. On the other hand, the Pharisee, who's characterized here, we're told the scriptures are very interesting in the way they lay it out. There are little details in just the quick verses. He took his position, it tells us. He took his position. In other words, he felt he had a right to have a very prime place, a very, very special seat. And so he took his position. You know, he was acting like he owned pew number 46 for all these years, and nobody better sit here with me. Of course, we know at St. Marie's that defies one of our great rules of humility, don't we? That we practice SOB, hospitality here. What does SOB mean? Slide over baby. Okay. And so we gladly welcome someone to join us in the pew. instead of demanding that they climb over us, because we want to be hospitable here and humble, not like a Pharisee. It doesn't none of us here, but it's good to remind everybody, okay? And so he feels he has this right and this privilege. And then the gospel writer tells this. St. Luke says, he spoke to himself, but one could also say he was speaking for himself. He spoke to himself. And so his prayer is all about me. And if you notice, his intercessions, they all start with I. And so you see, who is the most important person in his prayer? Moi. It's all about me. And not only that, but he continues in his egotistical manner, and he probably doesn't even realize he's doing this, because if you're not careful about a friendship, it's very easy to slip into me and I. And so then it tells, the scriptures tell us, he says in his prayer, I am not like the rest of humanity. I think we call that contempt. This contempt, okay? Even Jesus on the cross didn't have contempt for his crucifiers. So he has this contempt. What does that have to do with love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself? And then he says, I fast and I pay tithes. He's boasting about what he's done rather than humbly asking God what God would have him do, rather than having God grant him his mercy. On the other hand, the tax collector, we're told he stood at a distance. He could be that person in the back pew, or, believe it or not, I've seen this, someone who will sit in the courtyard during the Mass because they don't feel like they can come in. Think of that for a minute. And so it's a person who's very far at a distance because he feels so unworthy and so ashamed, and yet something inside of him is saying, I think I can go to him. There's that much, or that little mustard seed that says, I want to go to him because I don't have anywhere else to turn. And so at a distance, feeling unworthy and shamefaced, he's repentant and presumes nothing. Now he's totally at the disposal of God's mercy, which is exactly where God loves us the most. He would not even raise his eyes, we're told. And in his humility, he beats his breast. What did we do when we prayed the Confiteor? Okay, it's an action that is given to us through this passage. But also, it's the action of the crowd at the cross while Jesus is being crucified. They're jeering him. They're mocking him. And yet, at the moment of his death, St. Luke tells us they beat their breasts because they realized what they had done and who he was. And then he says this simple prayer, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That's all. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. St. Luke quotes Jesus as going on to say, whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Now that's interesting because that's not just filler. That's a solemn promise from God himself. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. There's no conditions laid on that promise. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. For as the book of Sirach tells us, the cry of the lowly pierces the clouds, and the Lord will not delay.
Regina Celi, letare, alleluia, qui aquam meruisti portare, alleluia, resurrectio